His name was Marcus Licinius Crassus, and he became the richest man Rome had ever produced by living off one simple rule: turn someone's worst day into his best day. He wasn't a Roman king and was not born into royalty, and eventually he stopped waiting for disaster at all. He learned how to profit from it while it was still happening. This is the story of how one man turned fire, debt, and other people's ruin into the largest private fortune in the ancient world, a fortune big enough to quietly buy the Roman Republic itself. And it's the story of how that same hunger, the thing that made him untouchable, is exactly what killed him. Because the way Crassus died would become the most famous punishment for greed in all of history. So who was he? Marcus Licinius Crassus was born around 115 BC into a respectable Roman family. Comfortable, but nothing remarkable. He started his adult life with roughly 300 talents. A talent was a unit of silver, and 300 of them was a serious sum. The kind of inheritance that let a man live easily and never work another day. Most men would have stopped there. Crassus was just getting started. Greedy Crassus. And his first real fortune didn't come from business, it came from a bloodbath. In the dying years of the Republic, Rome was tearing itself apart in civil war, and a general named Sulla won. To punish his enemies, Sulla did something brutal and extremely profitable. He published lists of names. The Romans called them proscriptions. Tongue twister. Anyway, if your name was on the list, you were finished, declared an enemy of the state, killed on sight, and everything you owned was seized and auctioned off. You don't want to be on the wrong side or poof, you're dead. Crassus showed up to those auctions with cash. He bought the confiscated estates of dead men for a fraction of their worth and walked away with the beginnings of a property empire built on other people's executions. The burning city business. Here's the thing about ancient Rome that makes this whole scheme possible. The city had no fire department. None. 1 million people packed into wooden apartment blocks, cooking over open flames, lit by oil lamps, and absolutely no one whose job it was to put out a fire. So fires happened constantly, and when one started, it spread. Crassus looked at that and saw a business. He assembled a private crew of 500 men, trained, equipped, and ready to move the moment smoke went up anywhere in the city. You think Crassus was the big bad wolf that will huff and puff your fire away? Think again. Because they weren't firefighters. Not exactly. When they arrived at a burning building, they didn't put the fire out. They waited, like they were watching a movie while eating popcorn. But this wasn't a movie, it was real. While the flames spread, Crassus would find the owner, a man watching his home and everything in it about to disappear, and make him an offer. A lowball price for the property, right there on the spot. Sell to me now, and my men go to work. Say no, and they stood there, and let it burn to the ground. Wow, what an offer, right? Sell to the rich man or watch your own home burn to ash. It got worse. The neighbors, watching the fire creep toward their buildings, would panic and sell too, for almost nothing, just to get something before the flames arrived. So a single fire didn't earn Crassus one building, it earned him the whole block. 2 birds, 1 stone. Plutarch put it bluntly. Crassus made his fortune, he wrote, by fire and war, turning the city's disasters into his greatest source of income. But a pile of scorched rubble isn't actually worth much. The real genius was what Crassus did next. A burned out building is just rubble. To make money from it, you have to rebuild it, and rebuilding costs money and labor. Crassus had a brutal solution to both. He owned slaves, a lot of them. And not just laborers. Crassus specifically collected skilled ones: architects, builders, craftsmen. He bought them, trained them, and put them to work restoring the very properties his fire crew had just helped him acquire. He once said the only people worth paying attention to were the ones who could build, because they were the ones making him rich. So the machine ran in a loop. A fire breaks out. Crassus buys the ruin for almost nothing. His own slaves rebuild it at almost no cost. And then he rents it back out, sometimes to the very people he'd bought it from. Buy the disaster cheap. Repair it with free labor, collect rent forever. Crassus's legal scam. And property was only part of it. He ran silver mines. He traded in slaves on a massive scale. He lent money to senators and turned them into men who owed him favors. Every stream fed the next. How big did it get? The historian Pliny put his fortune at around 200 million sesterces. Plutarch counted it at 7,100 talents, a number that, at the time, was roughly equal to the entire annual revenue of the Roman state. Sit with that. One private citizen was worth about as much as the whole government of Rome. And in Rome, that kind of money didn't just buy comfort, it bought control. In Rome, wealth wasn't the goal, it was the tool. The real prize was power, and Crassus understood that money was just power you hadn't spent yet, so he spent it everywhere. He lent to senators who needed cash for their campaigns, and a senator who owes you money is a senator who votes your way. He hosted enormous public feasts. He covered other men's debts. At one point, it was said that almost half the Senate was financially tangled up with him in some way. He built a quiet web of obligation across the entire Roman elite, and he sat in the center of it. But his money found its sharpest use in one young, ambitious, and deeply broke politician, Julius Caesar. Early in his career, Caesar owed staggering sums, and Crassus was the one who backed him, guaranteeing his debts, keeping his career alive at the moment it could have collapsed. He was betting on Caesar, and the bet paid off. In 60 BC, 3 men carved up the Roman world between them in a private arrangement we now call the First Triumvirate: Pompey, the great general, Caesar, the rising star, and Crassus, the banker who helped fund them both. He had done it. The boy with a modest inheritance now stood at the very top of the most powerful state on earth, with a general on one side and a future dictator on the other. He had bought his way to the summit, and it still wasn't enough. Here was the problem. In Rome, money bought a lot, but it couldn't buy the one thing Crassus wanted most: glory. And his two partners had it. Pompey was a celebrated conqueror. Caesar was carving his way through Gaul, sending back victory after victory, his legend growing with every dispatch. Beside them, Crassus was just the rich one, the financier, the man who paid for things while other men became heroes. For most people, being the wealthiest man alive would be plenty. For Crassus, it was a wound. He had everything except the thing that actually made a Roman immortal: a great military conquest of his own. So, at around 60 years old, he went looking for one, and he set his eyes east on Parthia, a vast, rich empire out beyond Rome's frontier. Notice the logic, because it's the same logic as the fire. Crassus didn't invade Parthia because Rome was threatened. There was no real war to fight. He went because he'd heard how wealthy the Parthians were, and because conquering them would finally buy him the reputation his money never could. It was the fire brigade all over again, scaled up to the size of an empire. See something valuable, take it. Worry about the cost later. Except this time, the man watching everything burn would be him. In 53 BC, Crassus marched a Roman army across the Euphrates and into Parthian territory. He was chasing a fortune and the glory that came with it. He found neither. Out on the open plains near a town called Carrhae, the Parthians were waiting, and they fought in a way the Romans had never properly faced. Crassus's legions were cut apart. The campaign he'd launched to crown his life became one of the worst military disasters in Roman history. His son was killed, and not long after, so was he. That's where the facts end and the legend begins, because the story Romans told afterward wasn't really about the battle. It was about him. They said the Parthians, knowing exactly who Crassus was and exactly what he loved, gave him one final reward. They took molten gold and poured it down his throat. There's almost certainly no truth to it, but that's not the point. The Romans invented that ending because it felt right. The richest man in the world, killed by an endless thirst for more, drowned in the very thing he'd spent his whole life chasing. Plutarch said it plainly. Crassus had many virtues, but every one of them was swallowed up by a single vice: greed. He'd built an empire of wealth on other people's worst days: fire, ruin, death. And in the end, the disaster he couldn't profit from was his own. If you like to see more videos like this, be sure to subscribe and like. I will see you in the next video.